They say your first love never really leaves you. I thought I was different, that I'd escaped mine. But 6 months ago, Scarlett walked back into my life, and she wasn't just a memory. She was a nightmare waiting to happen. The first time I saw her again was at a cafe I go to almost every morning. I just ordered my coffee when I turned around and froze. Scarlett was standing there, right by the entrance, her red lips curling into that familiar smile that always felt a little too sharp. At first, I thought I was imagining it. She looked exactly the same. The same piercing green eyes, the same perfect posture, like she was posing for a photograph. But there was something different too. A glint in her eyes that sent a chill down my spine, even as the rest of me warmed at the sight of her. She saw me before I could look away. "Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with that old mix of honey and poison. "It's been too long. Too long. 6 years, to be exact. 6 years since I'd walked away from her, swearing I'd never go back. I should have walked away again. But Scarlett had this way about her, this gravity that pulled you in before you even realized what was happening." We sat down at one of the small tables by the window, and for the first few minutes, it was normal. She asked about my life, my work. I asked about hers. She told me she'd just moved back to town and was getting settled. But there was something in the way she spoke, in the way she leaned in a little too close, that made my skin prickle. "Do you ever think about the past, Ethan?" she asked, her voice low and almost wistful. I didn't know how to answer that. Of course, I'd thought about the past, about her, but not in the way she probably imagined. Before I could respond, she smiled again and reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. "We should catch up properly. Dinner, maybe?" I hesitated. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to say no, to walk away and never look back. But then she tilted her head, her eyes softening just enough to make me doubt myself. "It's just dinner," she said, as if reading my mind. "Nothing more." So, I said yes. Dinner was at this upscale place I'd never been to before. Scarlett chose it, of course. She always had a taste for the extravagant. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table, the dim light catching on her hair and the glint of her earrings. She looked radiant, in that unsettling way only Scarlett could pull off. The conversation started light, her new job, my recent projects, but it didn't take long for her to steer it toward the past. "Do you remember that trip we took to the lake?" she asked, swirling her wine like she was conjuring up the memory. "You were so nervous about rowing the boat." I laughed, more out of discomfort than amusement. "Yeah, I remember. You nearly tipped us over trying to grab the camera." Her eyes lit up. "Exactly. You were so mad at me. But then we spent the rest of the afternoon laughing on the shore." She leaned in, her voice softening. "We were good together, Ethan. Don't you think?" I didn't know how to respond. Were we good together? Maybe, in the beginning, before things got complicated, before Scarlett's love turned into something darker. But sitting across from her, it was easy to forget all of that. Her charm was intoxicating, her gaze like a magnet pulling me in. By the time dessert arrived, I'd almost convinced myself that maybe she'd changed. Maybe we could be friends again. That illusion shattered the moment we got back to her apartment. Her place was immaculate, as always. Scarlett was a perfectionist in every sense of the word. But there was something about the space that felt staged, too perfect, like she'd spent hours arranging every detail just for me. She poured us each a glass of wine and led me to the couch. The air was thick with her perfume and the lighting was low, casting shadows that danced across the walls. We talked some more, and for a while, it felt like old times. But then she leaned closer, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "Do you ever regret leaving me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I think we both needed to grow," I said carefully. Her smile tightened just for a second before she smoothed it out. "You think I needed to grow?" "That's funny, Ethan. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I was the one holding you together." Her tone was light, almost playful. but there was an edge to it that sent a chill down my spine. I tried to laugh it off, but she wasn't done. You know, she continued, setting her glass down and leaning even closer, I never stopped thinking about you, about us. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was the best thing that ever happened to you. Her hand brushed my cheek, lingering for just a moment too long. Don't you agree? I nodded, more out of fear than anything else. I'd seen this side of Scarlett before, the possessive, obsessive side. The side that didn't take no for an answer. That was the first night I realized she hadn't changed at all. Over the next few weeks, Scarlett started showing up everywhere. At first it seemed coincidental. I'd see her at the cafe, or she'd bump into me while I was out for a run. But then she started appearing in places she had no reason to be. Outside my office, waiting by my car in the parking lot, even at my gym. She always had an excuse. Oh, I was just in the neighborhood, she'd say with that disarming smile. Thought I'd surprise you. But it didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like she was watching me. Her texts became relentless. At first, they were sweet. Photos of her dinner. A selfie with a caption like, "Wish you were here." But when I didn't respond right away, the tone would shift. Are you ignoring me? Why are you being so cold? I thought we were reconnecting, Ethan. Don't ruin this. One night, I came home to find her sitting on the steps of my building. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were red, her makeup slightly smudged. I just needed to see you, she said, standing as I approached. I've had such a bad day, and I didn't know where else to go. I should have sent her away. I should have told her this was too much. But Scarlett knew how to play me. She looked so vulnerable, so broken, and a part of me still felt responsible for her. So, I let her in. That night was the first time I truly saw how far Scarlett was willing to go. She'd brought a bottle of wine, and we sat on my couch, drinking and talking. She seemed calmer, more herself, and for a moment, I let my guard down. But then, she brought up our breakup. I never understood why you left, she said, her voice low and steady. You never gave me a real reason. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Scarlett, we were toxic. We brought out the worst in each other. It wasn't healthy. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time that night, her mask slipped. Toxic? Is that what you tell yourself? That I was the problem? She stood, pacing the room with her glass in hand. You don't get it, do you? I gave you everything. I loved you more than anyone ever will. And you threw me away like I was nothing. Her voice was rising, her movements sharp and erratic. I stood, trying to calm her down, but she turned on me, her face twisted with anger. You think you can just move on? She hissed. You think you can live your perfect little life without me? No, Ethan. It doesn't work like that. It never works like that. And then she threw her glass. The glass shattered against the wall, shards raining down like a warning. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Scarlett stood there, breathing hard, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. For a moment, neither of us moved. I think you should leave, I said, my voice trembling. She laughed, but it wasn't the warm, melodic laugh I remembered. This one was cold, sharp, laced with disbelief. Leave? You're telling me to leave? After everything we've been through? She took a step toward me, her heels clicking against the floor like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. You don't get it, Ethan, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You don't get to just cut me out. I'm not some chapter you can close and forget. I'm in you. I'm part of you. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I'd seen Scarlett angry before, but this was different. There was no reasoning with her, no calming her down. I'm serious, I said, trying to steady my voice. You need to go. Now. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a second I thought she might actually leave. But then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled. Okay, she said, her tone light, almost cheerful. If that's what you want. And just like that, she walked out. I didn't sleep that night. I kept waiting for the sound of her heels in the hallway, for a knock at the door, for something. But the hours stretched on in silence. The next morning I tried convincing myself that it was over, that she'd finally gotten the message. But deep down, I knew better. Scarlett didn't let go. 2 days later, I came home to find a box on my doorstep. It was wrapped in black paper, tied with a red ribbon. My stomach churned as I picked it up. There was no note, no return address, just my name scrawled on the top in her unmistakable handwriting. Inside was a framed photo of us from years ago. I didn't even remember taking it, but there we were, young, happy, wrapped up in each other. Except, something was off. Scarlett's face in the photo was scratched out. Her eyes were placed with jagged slashes that tore through the glass. Underneath the frame was a single note, written in her sharp, precise script. "You can't erase me." That's when I knew I wasn't safe. I changed the locks on my apartment and started avoiding the places I used to frequent. I told my coworkers not to let anyone through without calling me first. I even considered going to the police, but what could I say? My ex is leaving me creepy gifts? It sounded ridiculous. For a while, it seemed like she'd backed off. Weeks passed without a word from her, and I started to believe maybe she'd finally moved on. But then came the night I woke up to find her standing in my bedroom. It was 3 a.m. when I opened my eyes, groggy and disoriented. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. And there she was, standing at the foot of my bed, her silhouette perfectly still. My breath caught in my throat. "Scarlett," I croaked, my voice barely audible. She didn't say anything. She just stood there watching me. How did you get in here?" I asked, sitting up slowly. My mind raced. I'd changed the locks. I'd been so careful. She finally stepped forward, the light catching her face. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled. She looked unhinged. "I told you," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "You can't get rid of me." She held something in her hand, a knife. It wasn't large, but in the dim light, the blade gleamed like a threat. "I don't want to hurt you," she said, her voice cracking. I just want us to talk." My pulse was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Okay," I said, my hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "We can talk. Just put the knife down." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You don't mean that. You don't care about me. You never did. You just want me gone." I stood slowly, keeping my movements deliberate. "That's not true," I lied. "I care about you, Scarlett. I always have, but this isn't the way to fix things." She stared at me, her expression shifting between anger and despair. For a moment, I thought she might actually listen, but then she lunged. Her movements were wild, uncoordinated, and I managed to dodge her just in time. The knife grazed my arm and pain shot through me, but adrenaline kept me moving. I grabbed her wrist, twisting it just enough to make her drop the blade. She screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the apartment. We struggled, her nails raking across my face as I pinned her arms to her sides. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "Scarlett, stop!" But she didn't stop. She thrashed against me, her strength fueled by rage and desperation. Finally, I managed to shove her away. She stumbled, hitting the wall, and slid to the floor, sobbing. For a long moment, neither of us moved. My chest heaved, blood dripping from the cut on my arm. Scarlett just sat there, her head in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. "I loved you," she whispered. "I still love you. Why can't you see that?" I called the police that night. Scarlett was taken into custody, and I filed a restraining order the next day. But even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. Scarlett isn't the kind of person who lets go. And every time I hear footsteps behind me or see a shadow move out of the corner of my eye, I wonder if she's back. Because the thing about Scarlett is, she always comes back.